Hi everyone, it's Jen from Mr. and Mrs. Pose, and this is a pose alignment segment where we're going to talk about a quintessential yoga pose, downward facing dog. Downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana in Sanskrit. What is it? Why do it? What do we do if it's a bit uncomfortable or painful? And how can we improve it? I once had a student ask me why yoga teachers like downward facing dogs so much. This student really hated it, which was a real shame because the pose has a great many benefits. They come into three main categories. The first is clearly physiological. The pose is brilliant for strength and flexibility. It works on wrists, elbows, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles. It's a beautiful spinal extension, and with the shoulders in full flexion and externally rotated, we can work on stiffness in the shoulders, frozen shoulder, stiffness in the thoracic spine. If we get all of this right, it can really beautifully release neck tension and lower our heart rate. It's also fantastic for rehabilitating hamstring and knee injuries, with modification, of course, and it can relieve pain in the heels and things like calcaneal spurs. The second major category of benefits is really to do with our practice. It's a beautiful building block pose that prepares us for more challenging poses later on, like arm balances and handstand. It's the first pose that teaches us about grounding and extension, opposing muscles and joints in opposing directions, creating resistance against the floor in a closed chain exercise, for example. It's also a fantastic transition pose. It's part of the salute to the sun, if you've ever tried that, Surya Namaskar, as we call it. Basically, it gets us from standing to seated poses in quite an elegant way. The other thing it does is represent a safe inversion. So as adults in our culture, we very rarely go upside down. So this pose actually is a great way to reinvigorate the chest and the head without the compression or elevated blood pressure of something like a headstand. The third main category of benefits is really to do with the way the pose works on our nervous system. It's a great pose for addressing fatigue and lethargy. It creates energy when you're exhausted. It also addresses depression and anxiety. It increases self-confidence with the way it works on the nervous system. And it's also said to work on digestion and constipation, these kinds of things. So it doesn't mean that it's perfect for everybody. There are contraindications. If you suffer from headaches, high blood pressure, or menopausal symptoms, you might want to avoid spending a long time in this pose. You might want to support the head with a block, or you might want to try the half variation at the wall, which I'm going to show you in a second. The other thing we hear a bit about in this pose is wrist discomfort. Some people like to fold the edge of their mat over, creating some height under the heel of the palm. I like to create what's called a bandha at the wrist, a support for the wrist, by co-activating muscles above and below this joint complex. To do that, we spread our fingers wide, plant the hand firmly on the floor, the thumb can come in a little bit, middle finger points up towards the top of the mat, and as if we were making the action of closing the hand into a fist, we create that resistance against the floor, and what this does is activate the muscles above and below the joint, creating support. So try this in your downward facing dog. The other main area of difficulty in a downward facing dog is hamstrings, tight hamstrings and tight hips. If you have these, rather than avoiding the pose, certainly bend your knees as a modification. You may also want to play with the distance between your hands and your feet. Just be aware if you go too wide that you can start to round the back and potentially give a bit of compression into the ankles as well. So if you have more severe injuries like rotator cuff, or if you're in late pregnancy, you'll definitely want to try the half variation, which I'll show you now. We bring the hands to hip height and we stand quite close to the wall like this. Take a big step backwards, pressing the hands firmly into the wall. Forearms are rolling inward, upper arms are rolling outward, and we extend away like this. The hips are in a forward tilt. We've got lots of length through the shoulders and through the spine. To try the full variation, come to your mat. Come to hands and knees perhaps. Walk the hands about half to one hand length forward. Tuck the toes and then lift the hips towards the back of the mat. Rolling the shoulders outwards, the forearms inwards, and creating that wrist bunda that we talked about. Hips are towards the back of the mat. With beginners, we see this quite a bit, which is very arduous. So head towards the back of the mat, heels towards the ground. It doesn't matter if they don't get there today. Slight pigeon toeing of the feet can ease the pose a little, meaning the toes are a little bit closer together than the heels, and bend the knees if you suffer from tight hamstrings. So try downward facing dog today. If you're working with the pose for some time, you can try timing it, building up to 2 to 5 minutes. But take it nice and easy and subscribe to Mr. and Mrs. Pose. We'll see you next time. Thank you.